Okay, this is a brief presentation on revenue forecasting, and we'll go through this, and then I've got some data for you, and you can try to do the forecast yourself. All right, so let's get started. So what we're going to look at is 3 different models, all right, and there are actually many models to do this, and the company depends on the industry, and they probably have one that they use themselves every year, you know, so they've got history with it and everything, and maybe they've got the data they need for the assumptions. We'll start out with a top-down approach, and then we'll use what's called a build-up method, and then the last one is a line estimation. We'll do some regression. It's actually a line est function in Excel. And what I like about doing different methods is then I can compare them, you know, and see how, you know, how far, because these definitely have things that they favor, okay? So for some, like the top-down approach is more tied to national industry numbers, where the build-up method actually starts out with the company itself. So I want to see what the difference is between these two. You know, and then what's always nice about regression is, you know, least squares. That is just a good approach, and it takes into account crazy variance on revenue in prior years. So it just gives you backup, okay? It just helps confirm your result, just so you know you're not way out to lunch, you know, that you're not off the wall. And the key with revenue, the reason why it's so important is that it drives everything else, okay? Every other number on the income statement is a result of revenue, whatever that revenue forecast is. So it's important. Now the first one we'll do is the top-down financial forecast, and this is also known as what's called a breakdown method. Okay, and what it does is it goes out and it looks at the overall market. So it looks at, let's say that you're an insurance company, okay, and insurance is expected to increase by 4% next year, and that would be a national number. Okay, so it examines the overall market and uses this information to identify company demographics and a target market. It says that we have a piece of the market. You know, and you can actually figure this out, like if you know that the beer market, for example, in Orlando is you know, so many gallons, and I think that information is actually publicly available, then you can say, well, I've got 10% of that market, you know, and forecast based on what that whole market is expected to do. And what it assumes is that given the existing market and the potential for market growth, my company is going to capture a certain percentage of it in year one, with successive increases in the years that follow. Now, when this is kind of handy when it comes to having a like a startup to forecast, where you have got no history and you have no idea, you know, what they're really going to do. You want to start at least with knowing how big is the market. You know, how many players are there in it? What's the competition going to look like? Okay, can we expect to get 1% of that market in our first year? Okay, those are all tough decisions. The actual quantitative number crunching part of this is the easy part. The hard part is figuring out how economic reality is going to translate into the forecast for our company. And the one thing that you can say overall is that there's a risk that the forecast is overly optimistic. Okay, if you're looking at a national trend, that might be too optimistic for what you have. And it fits best for large companies that are well aligned with the industry. Okay? So some of the things that influence forecasting, for sure, the economic condition. I mean, you can just imagine all the forecasts that went out the window last March, okay, or where the stock market crashed in 2007 or 97, okay, those change everything. So this is a condition that has an impact on every business and market. Like if there's a depression in the economy, then people and businesses will lose money and they'll be reluctant to purchase. Okay, even when the economy is strong, when the economy is strong, they might be more likely to invest and buy. Okay, The other thing are policy changes. Just the changes that we had in privacy affected a lot of companies, all right, that required a big additional investment. So changes in policies or the introduction of new laws and regs can either help or hurt your business. I mean, you might be in a real good position for it, so that might get rid of some competition. So when forecasting your sales for the next period, you've got to just keep an eye on that policy changes, okay? It might be like an environmental initiative. The environment was out last year and now it's in again. So, those just affect your projections. Now for industry changes, every industry has similar products that are made by different organizations. Okay, so if you've got new tech improvements, changes in design, competitors running promotional campaigns. I mean, look at the competition between, oh God, our phones, an iPhone and, say Verizon and Sprint. Okay, it's just a tremendous, unending competition between those two companies. And Sprint always has all these promotional campaigns. All right, or new businesses entering the ring. They can affect the market share of the industry, which in turn will factor into your sales forecasts. So if you've got a giant moving into the area, that's going to make a difference. It's like Amazon affecting sales from little businesses in small towns. They just disappear, And finally, product changes. So changes in your product can heavily influence your sales forecast. And the changes might be rolling out over a new feature due to high demand or removing a useless feature or removing bugs. Okay, salespeople can leverage these product changes in shorten their sales cycle and increase sales. But those are, you've got to really keep a very broad view of it. You don't want to be an accountant with a narrow range that is good at financial statements and calculations. You need to have an eye on the business, on the industry, on global trends. If you're doing business in other countries, then that just multiplies it by some factor of other things that you've got to keep track of. Okay? So you want to have friends and you want people to talk to you and help you. I think that's probably one of the most important things in managerial accounting. So the method, okay, the top-down forecasts assume that national market, I'm going to say projections apply to the industry. Okay, apply to the industries. For example, the global air transportation industry is expected to decrease by 2.1% next year. So if you are Delta or American Airlines, this would definitely apply to you. Okay, I mean, there's no question. But if you're Alaska Air or maybe JetBlue or one of the smaller airlines, it may not. Okay, but you can still use that rate for guidance. Okay, to go against it and say, no, we're going up by 5%, you'd have to have some real evidence. Okay, if you have new improvements that you're planning on, these are not added to your revenue projection. Okay, it's assumed that the overall industry rate that we have includes all changes that would be taking place this year. Okay, we're going to do the last method, next method that we look at adds industry changes to the forecast, okay, to the base rate. So let's say you've got 3 projects, it'll add the impact of those 3 projects on top of this base, but not with top down. With top down, that growth rate assumes all innovations are within it. Okay, and here's an example. We're looking at 2011 to 2020, and these are all actual revenue numbers. All right, and we're saying that we expect the industry to have a 3% annual growth. Okay, 3%. So it's likely, I mean, if it's 3%, let's say our likely target, that this is going up by like 3% per year. Okay, for each year. And what I did was I put the 2 actual years in here, and then these would be the forecasts there. And the optimistic growth would be if it was 3.5%. okay? And then a pessimistic view would be, well, maybe it's only going to be 2%. Now, if we made these percentages bigger, it's only a 3% growth rate, so it doesn't look like much. But you should see there's everybody's the same for the 2 actual years. And then in 2021, it starts to change. And this is our likely path right here. There's the optimistic one. Okay, it's pretty tight. And there's the pessimistic projection. Okay, so you want to look at 3, and you might want to present 3 to management. Tell them what your thinking is, what some of your assumptions are, and then they can add to that discussion, okay, on what you see. And that's it for a top-down method, okay? So it just takes an expected percentage, okay, whatever is expected in the industry, and applies it to your company, and then you want to make an adjustment for an optimistic view of that, and then a pessimistic view, okay? Okay, now the next one is the BuildUp method. And this starts out with your current year's sales as a base and estimates what you think the growth percentage will be next year. And that could be like a running percentage that you've experienced, or some rationale, something that you can justify for what you think is going to happen next year. But then it adds the impact of action plans, of changes that you're going to make. So let's take a look. And this again is the build-up method. So think of your base year is your actual, your core business, and then you're going to add on layers for different projects, or maybe a sales line or another country, something that you're going to introduce to the business. Now, here's an example of a build-up method chart, and there's like one thing that's not showing here. First of all, here are my numbers year by year, and then this is my forecast there, and this is what we think it's going to be. Okay, our actual rate, and through here, I mean, it varied. Oh, that might be the actual rate for these years. I'm not sure. Maybe it's in here someplace, but it does vary. All right, it moves around, and you actually want to look at more numbers than this. Let me show you one thing. I think you should be able to see this. Here's the one we just did. This is what the actual looks like. Okay, these numbers are all over the place. So what we're doing is we're taking the last couple years and going forward. We had one estimate one time where, the last couple of years looked good, but this was like way down and way high. It was all over the place. So, you've got to make sure that you look at the data and get a good idea that, that whatever you're going forward with is reasonable. Okay, so here we've got a base revenue. Here's our base revenue, 28,598, then 884, 29,173, etc. And this blue part right here is our base revenue. Then they've got 3 different projects that they're going to go forward with and say a new marketing campaign. It's not a person for sure. That starts in 2021. 2022, etc., and continues to grow. So that's this next one. Then they've also got a new product that's coming out that they expect to increase their margins in an increasing way. And then finally, they're opening up a second location. Okay, so you can really see what the build-up method is going to result in. Do we have numbers though? Do we have okay, so our revenue here is going, let's say, it's going up to almost, say, 65,000 in 2025. If we go back here, this 2025 is only 32,000. Okay, so that makes a really big difference. So you'd have to reconcile for yourself what the difference is between these two. You know what I mean? Just to make sure that your base isn't too high, or maybe this base, I don't know, maybe there's something in there that doesn't belong in the future. So you've really got to know your business and know your numbers. And you'd also want to do, for the base revenue, you'd also want to do a pessimistic, likely, and optimistic scenario too, and then pick one to go forward with. And be able to justify it. That's the key. Now here's regression. Regression or line estimation is useful if you have at least 10 years of data, but you need 10 years, which any normal business does. For, if we were doing this in our companies, getting 10 years of data is pretty tough. The action plans are not added to the projection for regression. And in this example, the data are a bit more realistic, okay? Here's our data. In the first place, there's a scatter plot of what it looks like. Isn't that something? When you go to draw a line, though, it's like this. Okay, so it's not that bad once you draw a line, but when you first look at it, you think, oh my gosh, what's this? Does it have to go, would the line be something like that? And it sort of is. Okay, there is least squares. So our regression formula, our fixed cost would be 26,352 plus 34 would be our variable cost. That's the piece we've got. Okay, this doesn't look so bad until you go to do it yourself and you're trying to figure out what the projects are and everything. So finally, forecasting revenue is more of an art than a science. If you've got a startup with no history, if an economic crash happens, like what you predict for next year? Should the last quarter of this year go up? A lot of it depends on how well the fight against COVID goes. So startups, economic crashes, and industry disruptions, electric cars. Okay, they expect them all to be electric, I think, by 2025, something like. It's a pretty aggressive date. I can't be right. So don't quote me. But all these things pose significant challenges. Okay, so I've got a little project here for you with some numbers, and you can prepare a top-down, and then a build-up, and then a regression forecast with it. Okay.